Now, the mystery of Al Capone's TV set. The program that will dare to explore a subject heretofore shrouded in conjecture by many, and a subject really understood only by a few. It's a subject that has indeed crossed the mind of...
What is this? What are you talking about here?
Rita, do you mind? We are doing a program here.
What's all this mystery and conjecture or whatever you call
Conjecture.
it? Turn this silly music off.
Hey, we're doing a serious show here. Turn that music back on. I mean, I'm trying to be serious here.
No, you're not. You're getting everybody to watch the show just because Al Capone is in the title. Just like that other show in Chicago in the hotel basement.
Well, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, we do have a TV set here that Al Capone is said to have owned in the 1920s. And we are going to show it shortly. That other show with what's-his-name didn't even have that, right? I mean, that's the point here.
What point? This is just a little show about early television. Very early television. It's a documentary, that's all, about scanner TV that predates TV as most folks know it. No real mystery.
Well, I thought some folks might find that a little dry, so I thought I'd spike their interest with a few dramatics. Anyway, a lot of folks didn't even know Al Capone had a TV set.
Because they didn't know TV existed in the 1920s. So let's meet our guest and learn all about early television.
The way Big Al used to watch it.
Hush now.
All right, what are all these, this equipment that you have here on display?
I'm glad you asked that. Rita, what we have here is a mechanical television receiver and transmitter. Really, it's a camera. And it's used to show the sort of thing that was being done in the late 20s and early 30s here in this country as well as in other countries. And they use scanning discs, which are these round affairs on the front, and both of them have that. And the one on here by me is a camera, and this can take a object and make a picture of it electrically, which is reproduced over there on this other one, which is the receiver. And in this case, I can operate it with a slide, which has a little Felix the cat image on it. And this image then appears on the receiver. Or I can operate it with this small plastic bunny rabbit, which in this camera rotates very slowly, and a shadow of it appears on the receiver.
And these are some of the things which they first saw on the early the screen they might
They
have.
generally saw silhouettes, not much different than this slide. So what I've done here is duplicate the kind of thing that was being built in the 20s that quite a few people experimented with. And the radio stations that the more common ones, let's say the more popular ones of that day, were transmitting television signals during the normal broadcasting hours, and people who had receivers could try to pick them up. And in the early days, if they could see anything that they could recognize, they felt that they were doing very well. So generally, all it was shown were just simple silhouettes. A little later, they actually showed some movies, but not like the movies we see in theaters today. They were basically like cartoon characters. And
Felix the cat was the
Felix
first,
the cat was, it turns
image.
out, where Felix gets in the picture, you might say, is that RCA, who was working with this kind of thing as other companies were, they were using a papier-mâché statue of Felix the cat as a test pattern. And the reason was because the cat's basically a black painted figure with white showing, you know, wherever his eyes and the mouth and that sort of thing were. And it was a very good pattern for the early television sets. So many pictures that you might see of any RCA setups, quite often there was a Felix showing in the picture, their test pattern.
So then, how did they evolve from this period on? I mean, what
Okay.
came?
Let me just say that this kind of system really originated before they could even build it, because there were some people, a man named Nipkow in Germany, who as early as the late 1800s actually patented a system that worked like this, but he couldn't build it because they didn't have the necessary amplifiers. There would be like the tubes and things that they weren't available at that time. So it wasn't until really the 20s that this type of system was actually possible, and quite a few countries built this sort of thing in an attempt to finally try to make it commercial. It actually was never successful because at best the pictures were crude, and you've seen here that they're not that sharp, although you can certainly recognize these images like this Felix the cat. It wasn't until the system went fully electronic, which started occurring in the early 30s, that the resolution and the picture sizes started becoming large enough to where people were willing to spend money for receivers. Camera has with it the necessary equipment to operate the receiver, which is over here on my right. On the camera, we have a disc that rotates, and this particular disc is rotating at 900 revolutions per minute. It has a series of holes in it, which are in a spiral, and these holes, when they're rotating, they have the ability to break up the image into a series of signals that the receiver can reassemble as a picture. And I can show a slide in this camera, or I can use this small plastic figure of a bunny rabbit, and either one can be reproduced. The camera includes a light source to illuminate the subject, whatever it is. That's this little tube here. And here is the motor that operates the disc itself. And on the side here, over here, is the electronic system that operates the light source, which is in the receiver. And this contains the necessary amplifiers. This is what Nipkow didn't have in 1884.
We had television in 1884.
No, Nipkow developed the disc. He actually patented this disc and the way it's made in 1884. And he couldn't build a system because they didn't have amplifiers. That's not uncommon, incidentally, for that sort of thing to occur. As early as 1907, the system that we use today for television, the electronic system, was actually described by an engineer named Swinton, and he had no way to build the apparatus because none of the equipment necessary to build the system he described was available. Yet what he described is actually nearly exactly what we use today in 1986.
Let's have a look at the camera.
Well, the camera...
The receiver, rather, not the camera, because we just saw the camera.
Yeah, the camera operates the receiver through a cable, and this cable can be any length, any reasonable length. Mine's only about 20 feet of wire here, but it's adequate for showing the equipment off. The receiver consists of the disc, which is very similar to the one in the camera. It has a motor, like the one in the camera again, to rotate it. It has a means of changing the speed of the disc through a brake. This particular brake happens to be a magnet that doesn't touch the disc, but its influence is such that it'll slow this disc down, because it is necessary in this system for these two discs to be synchronized and operate together. Anyway, the receiver contains one other item, which is a light source. And this box here at the top contains 9 light-emitting diodes, which is a relatively modern device, but they supply the light that forms the image.
Now, you've taken them out of the cabinet for this demonstration.
Yes, I have.
Let's have a look at those cabinets.
Okay. The camera cabinet is here, and it's basically a wooden box, not really much more than a radio cabinet might be. And this particular one has a hinged top that can be raised and lowered so as to get to the slide and to the control on the camera and allow me to change the slide or do whatever I wish while it's in the cabinet. The receiver cabinet, which I'll bring over, lens. The picture size on this camera is approximately 1 1/4 inches. It's not quite square, but it's nearly square. And it's about the size of a 35 millimeter slide, roughly, the picture size. With this lens, when this is in the cabinet, when the receiver's in there, this lens expands that out to roughly about a 3-inch square picture. This particular unit shows a yellow colored picture, yellow and black, whereas some of the others that I've made show red and black. Red is more original in that in the early days the pictures were typically reddish in color. They used what they call a neon lamp. And anyway, we use light emitting diodes, those of us that are involved in this, because they operate at lower voltages and they are a bit easier to use.
Just on the aside, it's my understanding you built these cabinets in the style of the 20s.
Yes, I did. I tried to anyway. And
Well, that's a remarkable piece of craftsmanship.
but it kind of adds to the overall effect to have a nice cabinet, because the original units, there were commercial receivers like this sold, and those that were generally had cabinets of this nature, including the magnifying lens, similar to what I have on this one.
What I'd like to do is put that receiver back into the cabinet and have a look at how it might be
All
if you
right.
were sitting in front of the TV set on a warm summer evening in 1925.
It'll just take a moment to do that.
Gee, the repairman would take 3 weeks to do what you're doing right now and charge you $500. We have to
Well,
get
wait,
this,
you haven't got my bill yet.
we have to get this camera aligned in order to get exactly in front of us because it's got a very narrow field of vision.
Yes.
Let's see if we can't get this bulky camera, and the cameras of 1986 are a lot more bulky than they were in 1925. Get this sort of cranked down and line it up with that.
Those of you that are a little older might recall that the first television sets, people used to say it takes an engineer to operate one with all those knobs on it. I think some of them had as many as 16 knobs on the front.
Okay.
Well-
I think we're going to have to close those shades to get a little less light. I'll be right back. That knob you're twirling has got nothing to do with the station. That's strictly the adjustment for the scanning wheel to get the RPMs in exact match with
That's right.
with the camera.
The discs have to be synchronized.
So if you wanted to watch a different station, you'd have to buy a different TV set. One TV set per station. See, that's a gimmick that we shouldn't tell the networks about. And the light's off if we can find the switch.
Let me find it. I think it's over there.
Oh, there's our image. Not really bright, but then for 1925, it's better than sitting there looking at your radio, I suppose.
I think you get used to it after a while, too.
The
Your eyes
magic,
become accustomed to the lower light levels, and it starts looking a little better.
we're supposed to be looking at a silhouette of a rabbit turning around slowly, about 10 RPM. People at home back then were thinking the magic of pictures in their living room, right?
That's right.
And this made them happy for a while.
Yes, it did. To get anything at all was quite an achievement.
But why did television go into limbo then for so many years after the 20s?
I think because people started to expect more out of the system than the system could provide.
You want to get those lights again, please, Rita?
Furthermore, the electronic systems in the beginning, although they showed a lot of promise, they still didn't work as well as was necessary to really make the system a commercial success, but not really any clearer or sharper. So in order to get the resolution on larger images, it was necessary to add more lines to the picture. And with the mechanical systems, other than for some few examples in England where they they had some unusual techniques. These never went over about 60 lines in a picture. And it was established quite early in this field that for really acceptable resolution, it would require something over 300 lines in the image.
How many RPM is that scanning wheel going right now?
It's running at 900 RPM.
And this one has to be exactly 900 as well.
Yes.
Otherwise you get what? A lot of blurring.
No, you get no image. They not only have to be running at the same speed, but they have to be physically positioned so that they're operating in respect to each other, so that the outermost hole in the scanning disc on the camera has to be in the same position as the outermost hole on the scanning disc in the receiver. They physically have to be together. And by slowing one down with this magnetic brake I mentioned earlier, I can accomplish that.
That's the mystery of Al Capone's TV set.
Anyway, I said earlier, some of the first black and white sets in the early 40s had many, many knobs for adjustment, and people used to think it took an engineer to get one to work. These sets always only had one adjustment, which was for synchronizing, and that's the one on the front of this set.
And you receive whatever the station dictates.
That's right.
Or you turn it off. There's not even an on and off.
Well, you could tune it in like you would tune in a radio. There were sometimes more than one station in your area. I think at the most there were about 35 stations in the country actually transmitting television pictures. And in any one area, it was an exception. I think it was only in the New York area. You might have 3 stations that you could select from.
When did this system turn out of fashion then?
About 1931 to 32, it really started going out of fashion because people were expecting more out of the system than was possible. And about that time, the electronic systems started appearing. And although they were better, they were still not adequate to be a commercial success.
Is there any record as to what the very first TV program was?
Program? No, I don't. I'm sure there is. I just don't know the answer to that.
I know Felix the Cat, that slide you're showing us, that's got historical interest because I know in 25 or so, one of the TV stations showed nothing but a statuette of Felix the Cat spinning around on a slow turntable.
Yeah, RCA was the one that actually used Felix the Cat as a test pattern. And just about all of the work that they did involved Felix the Cat. And since it was a large company and their work was fairly well known, most people knew about Felix. Felix used to be like Mickey Mouse, you know, just about all of the kids knew who Felix the Cat was, and you could buy little statuettes or paper mache figures of Felix, just like you could of Mickey Mouse some years ago. So he was a popular figure. And it was really the color scheme of Felix that made him adaptable to the television system. The high contrast black and white colors that make up his body.
Well, in a sense, this is almost color television because it's red and black, right?
Right.
Just like the peacock when he went to color.
Yes. That's the equivalent of Felix. Right.
By 1939, mechanical television was out. Television had progressed to the cathode ray tube system that we're still using today, and the old scanner system was forgotten except by hobbyists like Peter Yanczer, who we just saw, and who built those operating sets. This 1939 5-inch Meissner chassis was built in Chicago and sold for $149.95. Also available, they said, was a plain wood cabinet for it. The set was said to be very reliable, but actually the development of the cathode ray picture tube, of which these are some early examples, made television as we now know it a reality. Now this isn't a replica, it's the real thing. This is a Western television of the mid-1920s, and probably the reason you've tuned the show in and stayed with it so far. Yes, this set is partially documented to have belonged to Al Capone in Chicago. You're looking at the synchronous control that kept the scanning wheel at the exact same RPM as the broadcast station scanning camera. If you're squinting at the lettering, it reads Orpheus Televisor, Roth Downs Manufacturing Company. No doubt a supplier's component that Western television was dealing with at the time. Now, the back of the set is open, so what we'll do is swing it around to give the camera a look inside. Don't expect to see any tubes. Remember, this is mechanical television. Actually, there was one tube, the neon tube, that produced the image, but at the moment it's not in its place in the little box at the top of the scanning wheel. It was crude, but it worked, and it was television. We're looking at Al Capone's TV set.
It's a fabulous Roaring 20s set.
I don't hear any roaring, but it's made by Western Television in Chicago, a company that is long since bankrupt. I wonder why. Made in 1928, a 48-line scanning set, one of the earliest complete home television sets using the mechanical scanning method, it says here. And at various times, one of the officers of this company was the boy wonder of television, U.A. Sanabria, who used to make the famous Sanabria TV set in Chicago. And this set belonged to none other than Scarface Al Capone.
Too bad he couldn't watch The Untouchables.